democracy around the world. So those are some of the attitudes, and these are, in some sense, they're in significant congruence with the mainstream American attitudes, and in some sense, they are very, very much more positive than the attitudes of mainstream America.
Okay. Now, with that data, that reflects that the community is fairly well versed with the world events. They are patriotic. Economically, they are well placed. They're educated. Keeping all those, all that information in mind, why is it they are so disenfranchised?
That's a very, very complex question. I mean, the answer to that is first of all, it's complex because it is hard to pin down a reason. There are a variety of things that go into it. One is that if you look at the composition of the community, there are 1/3 of the community is African American, and the rest is divided mainly between Arabs, Southeast Asians, and others.
You mean South Asians rather than just South Asian? Okay.
When I mean South, I mean from Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Indonesia, that part. Yeah. So when we look at that composition, what you see is that among the African American, coming out of the civil rights movement and all the experience in the 60s, many did not favor participation in the political process. They were disillusioned by the political process. The political process did not enfranchise them to begin with, so they were not, engaged participants. Then when you look at the immigrants and this is the third wave of Muslim immigration to this country. As I mentioned, the first wave could be traced pre-Columbus, and if you don't say that's the first one, certainly the first wave would be the first slaves that came to America. The second wave would be right around the early 1900s, before the World War, especially when railroad was being built. There was large numbers of workers brought in from Syria, Lebanon, and that part of the world, which meant a lot of Muslims came in. And not just Muslims, but Arab Christians, but certainly there were significant Muslims that came in. And the third wave, the final wave that we are in today, is the wave that came in during the Cold War. In the 60s is when it started. The immigration policies were more liberalized, and America was vying for the top brains of the world with Soviet Union, and based on that, they were bringing in, they were searching around the world for top professional brains, and that's how people immigrated to America. So when you look at this new wave of immigrants, many of them are in their first or second generation, and it is not unusual to see first, second generation Muslims or first, second generation immigrants not as engaged in the political process. They are busy with their lives, they're just trying to get themselves situated, and they don't follow, they're not as well integrated in that sense. But what has also happened is that many of the Muslims, especially who come from countries, there's a significant amount of Muslims that came to this country fleeing dictatorships. They were political asylum seekers. And that's the experience that has shaped them, that they have lived in a situation where political engagement was frowned upon, so when they came here, they did not engage themselves. So that's one reason, although that's not the entire reason for it. The other reason is that, as I mentioned, American Muslims are participating in the voting process and in the electoral process in large numbers, but it has not led to automatic enfranchisement. Partly, I think the blame would have to be also placed at the feet of the policymakers and the government institutions, that there has not been a conscious engagement with minority communities as much as it needs to be. You can say that with the African American community, that engagement is improving, but there's a lot to be done on that end. And then you can imagine that the rest of the other communities, whether it's the Hispanic community, the Muslim community, and others, the sense of engagement is not there. So they're not represented in many of the policy-making circles. even though some of the policies that are being crafted affect them disproportionately. I.e., foreign policy towards Middle East certainly affects the Muslim community disproportionately because so many of the Muslim community still have family roots or business relations with that region, and Muslim voices are not represented during the crafting of those policies.
You know, there's a general impression that perhaps people of a certain faith tradition that shall remain nameless are more competitive, more aggressive, more seekers. Is it that Muslims are laid-back, that they are not as aggressive in trying to create a place?
I do not subscribe to any oversimplifying labels of any one community over the other. People are people, they are diverse. Within each communities, there are people that are go-getters, that are hard workers, and within each community, there are people that are just laid back and not as hardworking. That's because there is no data that supports that kind of oversimplification about any community.
Just for the benefit of the viewers, I'd like to add that we're going to be discussing this topic in the second half of this program as well, and that would be shown next week. But a minute or so that is left. Do you have any suggestions? And we'll
in terms of suggestion, I think there is a twofold suggestion. The American Muslim community has to show much more effort towards civic engagement. Yes, the numbers are very good. They are heartening to see this level of civic engagement, but more needs to be done. Anytime anybody is living in an advanced democracy like the United States of America, each group would have to create its own space at the table. And the way you create space for yourself at the table is through sustained engagement. So there has to be a much more recognition within the Muslim community that this is not an afterthought activity. It has to be a core activity, as it should be for every other community.
Sure.
Because that's the way you get your voices and you get your issues heard by people. On the other side, there has to be a recognition on the policy-making side, on the government side, and other influential, what I call influencers within the society. What I mean by influencers are people who are in government, academia, media, and those kind of engagements. There has to be a much more conscious effort to engage a much more diverse group of people. Diversity does not stop with any one group, because America is transforming itself. There are many more different groups that are in America today than were ever before.
Absolutely.
So diversity is not one group. Diversity is everybody. And that entire spectrum then has to be engaged. Yes, it is much more challenging at that level. It is easier to say, you know what, I just talked to this group X and I've fulfilled my requirement for diversity. Unfortunately, that's not that simple.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us. I'd like to thank the viewers at home for joining us. We hope to see you again next week at the same time. May God Almighty guide us all. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be unto you. حي على الفلاح
I'm an African American.
I'm Hispanic American.
I'm of European heritage.
My forefathers overcame the trials of slavery.
I've been a Girl Scout since I was 6 years old, and now I'm a troop leader.
One of my ancestors was a member of the Continental Congress.
I served in our nation's armed forces.
2 of my uncles fought for our country in the Korean War.
And I am an American Muslim.
And I am an American Muslim.
I am an American Muslim.
Muslims are part of the fabric of this great country and are working to build a better America.
You're watching Local Access, Channel 29, exclusive programming for Comcast subscribers.